As evidenced by this channel, Total War is a huge part of my gaming experience. As someone who enjoys this series despite all of its faults, I'm always on the lookout for other games that can provide a similar experience. In the past, I have looked at King Arthur the Role-Playing Wargame along with its sequel. While I still play the original from time to time, the battles are unfortunately not at the level of what Total War provides. That brings us to today's title from 2005 in Imperial Glory. Developed by Pyro Studios and published by Eidos Interactive, Imperial Glory is often compared to Empire Total War due to the game's focus on musket warfare. Despite this, it actually predated Empire Total War by 4 years and even featured naval combat. Regardless, is this Total War clone worth playing, or is it just another poor man's imitation? When you start up the game and choose the campaign, you have one of 5 great powers to choose from: Great Britain, France, Austria, Prussia, and Russia. Each power has its own starting conditions as expected. This is a bit on the low side considering nations such as the Ottoman Empire, Spain, Portugal, Sweden, and many others are not playable. They are instead treated as minor nations for the big boys to mess around with. Because I want to be on the European mainland to start, I will choose to play as Russia for this playthrough. We will now begin the game in the month of July and the year of 1789. Compared to Empire Total War, this game is ahead of that game's starting date by 89 years. Instead of each turn being a year, half a year, or a season like many of the other Total War games, it is instead at a monthly basis, similar to Fall of the Samurai. This means that the overall pace of the game is much slower than a typical Total War campaign. For each province, you can only recruit 1 unit at a time, along with constructing 1 building at a time. The other big difference is the amount of resources you'll need to keep track of. You'll have your money income as expected, but this is not affected by any unit upkeep. Instead, unit upkeep is affected by your food supply. When your units are not garrisoned or in enemy territory, the food consumption increases. Unless you play as Russia and start with one, my suggestion would be to build a food rationing warehouse as quickly as possible. Having a high food supply and income is vital to conducting a full-scale war. Raw materials and populations are also important for constructing buildings and recruiting units respectively. Research is also a huge part of this game and is separated out by eras. The first era in the tech tree applies to all the great powers. The second and third eras are dependent on your government style and the decisions you make to get there. If you choose to be a more democratic regime for the second era, you will have access to more democratic government styles in the third era, such as a republic or a constitutional monarchy. The same will apply if you choose to be an autocratic in your second era. It's a very interesting concept to shape your nation, although there aren't enough differences in the tech tree to make that much of an impact. Outside of a few passive benefits, you'll still have a majority of the same buildings and units present. Researching certain technologies will also bring quests to complete. These will usually require a certain amount of resources or trade routes to be set up to complete. Completing these quests will give your nation a certain bonus, such as an increase in raw materials production or the ability to see the entire map for the rest of the campaign. Even though you can take the advantage of these quests, the other 4 great nations can do the same as well. Therefore, it's best to complete these as early as possible to prevent other nations from claiming these rewards. This is a pretty fun and interesting mechanic and is definitely beneficial in the long term. Diplomacy is a bit of an interesting bag here. At first, you won't have many options available to you. Instead, you'll need to research specific agreements such as a rite of passage or a commercial treaty. There's actually quite a bit of different options available here, along with the ability to peacefully annex smaller nations. This is done by building a consul in the nation you want to eventually take over and try to get the sympathy to 100%. Increasing sympathy with another nation can be done with additional buildings or by signing various agreements such as a defensive alliance or by allowing a rite of passage when requested. It's fun to play around with the various options here, especially with annexing nations through peaceful means. My only complaint is that it's a bit of a slog to have to research many of these diplomatic options. And as much as I would like to continue to talk about the campaign because it is pretty good overall, there is a second half to these Total War-esque titles. That, my friends, is the battle system. The campaign map is divvied up in a Risk-style board similar to the original Shogun and medieval Total War, meaning each province has its own handcrafted map. If it's one thing I have to give praise regarding the battle system, are the maps on offer. They often get pretty creative, with Britain in particular featuring a literal castle to store troops in. It's this level of creativity that helps to give each map its own particular feel. Unfortunately, this is where most of the praise goes out the window, as something as simple as deploying troops is an outright antiquated pain. Instead of dragging your troops out like any other Total War game, you need to select your troop with the left mouse button and drag them along the deployment zone. This feels incredibly cumbersome and is hard to appropriately line up your troops. It can be done, but it takes a lot more time than expected. Once battle unfolds, more issues begin to unfortunately show. Units are divided up into 3 classes: infantry, cavalry, and artillery. You'll have your expected stats with each troop, including ranged attack, melee attack, armor, and range. What is missing, however, is morale. For some reason, morale is not a factor in any of these battles. This may sound minor at first until you realize that everyone fights until the last man, including militia. That means if you want to have a strong army to begin with, it's better to equip your commanders with militia and have them overwhelm each of the enemy. Since line soldiers are only slightly better than militia in melee, you can easily overwhelm them with numbers. Cavalry in particular is incredibly powerful, having heavy armor and better melee stats. So basically, from a game that's supposed to be focused on musket warfare, it's actually preferable to create a melee focused army. This is such a major oversight that it's very hard to enjoy any of the battles or take it seriously in any way. I mainly prefer to auto-resolve because I just did not enjoy what the battles had to offer. It's a shame too, because when things are working as intended with regiments of line infantry and cavalry and artillery to support, there is quite a bit of fun to be had. Buildings can be occupied by ranged troops to be used as cover from enemy fire. Destroyed buildings with artillery is also fun as you destroy enemy troops from within. If they just added the morale system to give value to the elite troops, this would actually have been a fun alternative to Empire Total War's battle system. But even if you somehow enjoyed the battles here, good luck actually completing them. Multiple campaigns in multiple machines with multiple fixes. I've had so many crashes to the desktop after completing battles. It's got so bad that I actually cannot complete this campaign because one battle constantly crashes to the desktop no matter how many times I've beaten it. I can technically auto-resolve to move past it, but why would I auto-resolve a winnable battle that the game will consider a loss? I'll also probably run into another issue similar to this as well, so it doesn't feel like I should auto-resolve this to begin with. It's just a lost campaign at this point. I even tried this on the good old XP machine and I still have issues. Unfortunately, I just don't think it's preventable despite the many fixes and solutions I've tried. And I mentioned this before, so I might as well go into it here. Yes, this game does contain naval battles, which predates Total War's inclusions of them by 4 years. Seeing how these play out, a part of me believes that Creative Assembly may have copied what was on offer here. You have various ammo types to use and the ability to use a full barrage attack. These are fine and work better than the land battles, but don't expect too much from these. A majority of your battles will be land battles, and there aren't enough ship types to make the naval battles that interesting in the long run. Outside of the campaign, you can play some custom battles and some historical battles as well. Since I have already said my piece on the battle system, I do not find these worthwhile, although it is interesting to see the different maps this game has on offer. And that brings us to the conclusion and my final recommendation. Overall, I am very mixed at what is provided here, as I really enjoyed what the campaign had to offer. Compared to other Total War titles, there is far more to play with in terms of campaign depth. Unfortunately, this is a game of 2 halves where the battles are just plain mediocre and horribly balanced. How morale was never implemented at all is a terrible design choice and a huge omission. I would still barely recommend it though if it wasn't for the constant crashes and bugs found throughout, making it a huge pain just to get through the campaign. There are some nice ideas here, but I just can't recommend it due to the overall lackluster execution. Stick with Empire Total War and the various mods you can find online. I unfortunately cannot recommend it, even though I really wanted to. Thank you for watching as always. Better games are hopefully around the corner and yet to come. And as always, this is Powerhouse, signing off.